comes to mind when you think of Black woman? Strong, resilient, competent, self-assured, seductive, impervious, queen. Whatever it may be, the truth is, Black women are varied and diverse. They come in different shapes, sizes, shades, educational backgrounds, religious traditions, and even different regions. But there is one thing that we all have in common, and that is our connection to Black men. Love it or hate it, Black men are a part of us, and we can't deny it. Why? Well, because their DNA runs through our bodies, and that's actually not a bad thing. While listening to the false promises of Black love, I had the opportunity to study and search out many of the different claims being made. While I understand and appreciate any person's attempt to address the struggles that are unique to Black women, I found information presented within the video to be problematic and wanted to address a few claims that I believe were either taken out of context or downright incorrect. Now, about the Snow Bunny crisis, y'all, Black men marry Black women more than any other group of women. Now, we are more likely to see a Black man with a preference compared to a Black woman with a Brad, that's true, but Black men are still wifing up Black women at a rate of about 85%. Many like to cite the study of Doherty, Hamilton, and Goldsmith regarding colorism, and they promote the idea that light-skinned Black women are more likely to be married than dark-skinned Black women. But if you study it closely, you actually find out that this is not the case for Black women over the age of 30. And by the way, most Black women tend to get married older anyway. Furthermore, light-skinned Black women who grew up in a single-parent household face the same amount of disadvantages in marriage as dark-skinned women who grew up in single-parent households. And by the middle age, there are more dark-skinned women who are married than light-skinned women simply because there are more dark-skinned women than light-skinned women, period. Good news is, whether you're high value, middle income, or working class, there are Black men on all levels who are open to marrying the right Black woman, whether she is light-skinned or dark-skinned. Now, about men not paying child support or stepping up to the plate as fathers, yeah, that's true in some cases, but that's actually a pretty small percentage of men. Nearly 54% of Black men are single and childless. And of these single parents within the Black community, 89% of single parents are women, and only 11% of single parents are men. So what does that mean? Well, quite frankly, that there is a large percentage of women who are procreating with a very small group of men. You do the math. As for men not being able to support a household, granted, but the same can be said for American men in general. 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and even white economists out there are reporting on white rage and the growing discontent that white men and men of all ethnicities have over their loss of ability to sustain their home on one income. This is not a Black American problem. This is an American problem, and to overlook this would be short-sighted at best. Now, about hypergamy, y'all, the US was rated last in upward mobility, which basically is the ability for a person to move up in class. So while it's certainly nice to dream about meeting your Prince Charming, your chances of actually marrying into wealth are incredibly slim if you were not born into it. And the chances of hypergamous marriage sink even lower if you are seeking to marry outside of your race due to interethnic competition. Now, when we're speaking about violence, most ethnicities have high rates of bi-directional violence. While men are more likely to commit violent crimes, the data shows that interpersonal violence is typically initiated by women. According to a collaborative study by the Journal of Partner Abuse and the Association of Domestic Violence Intervention Program, 50.9% of domestic abuse among whites was interpersonal, compared to 49% among Latinos and 61.8% among African Americans. Now, in terms of initiation, Black women are 2.27 times more likely to initiate violence towards Black men compared to white women, who are 2.26 times more likely to initiate violence towards white men, and Hispanic women, who are 1.24 times more likely to initiate violence against Hispanic men. Reasons for this are inconclusive, but women are now fighting back, and in many instances, fighting first. This is true across all ethnicities, and especially in the cases of Black women. Regarding science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, also known as STEM, women make up an incredibly small percentage of STEM, particularly the hard sciences. African American women in particular make up only 2.9% of higher education degrees earned in STEM and 1% of all engineering degrees, compared to 7% of Black men. Black women make up only 2% of all STEM jobs in the workforce, compared to 20% among white women. When it comes to STEM, Black women are underperforming in comparison to both white women and Black women. 72% of Black undergraduate engineering degrees are given to Black men, and 75% of Black graduate engineering degrees are given to Black men. So, unless we are including nursing, psychology, or other soft sciences, Black men outnumber Black women in STEM education and STEM jobs in every single category. About women outpacing their men in education. The same can be said of all races. Across every ethnic group, you can find more women than men in college, with the exception of the STEM fields. Even with that, higher education does not always equate to higher pay. The wage gap still exists, and while there are many different theories as to why, according to the Wall Street Journal, 3% of Black female earners make more than 6 figures annually, compared to about 10% of Black male earners. Black men are twice as likely to make more than $250,000 a year than Black women are. So, no matter how you look at it, men are not really looking for handouts from the women who make less than them. This is further solidified when we look at debt and assets. And since Black women tend to have more debt and less assets than their fellow Black men, then it's safe to assume that the majority of us won't find ourselves in the position of paying another man's way, unless he is indeed a pookie. Now, when we're talking about the 50-50 paying setup, we can thank equality and feminism for that. I mean, after all, women who have decided to be modern, career-oriented, strong, self-sufficient, independent, highly educated, and boss babes, they shouldn't require the chivalry of the men that they are equal to, right? I mean, after all, that would be disrespectful to the equal dynamics that we have fought for. Or do we really want a modern setup with traditional benefits? Regarding the book referenced, Is Marriage for White People? Y'all, Rolf Richard Banks' analysis has actually been criticized by numerous sociologists for generalizing the experiences of Black women. In the book, he acts as if most Black women have elite educations and salaries, but only a small minority do. Furthermore, calling for Black women to date out is not really a solution to the problem, especially since most Black women are not acculturated to compete against other women for the men in their respective communities. I must reiterate that only 3% of Black women make 6 figures or more, and only 0.5% of Black women have a PhD. Meanwhile, about 1/3 of Black women live at or beneath the poverty line. We've already established that, generally speaking, men make more money than women, and so while some high-powered career women may find it difficult to connect with a man on their income level, the percentage of women who are in that situation is so incredibly small. And Even if they are to expand their options, they have to now compete with other races of women who make more money and have more education than Black women do on average. The good news is, most Black women don't have to worry about ever finding themselves in that situation. Now, about the claim that Black women never sought out anybody in the Black community, ever heard of daughters of the trade? How about Black women who collaborated with imperialist nations? How about the Black woman who chose to marry European slave traders to profit from the mass enslavement and genocide of African people? Finda Lawrence? Madame Tinubu? Elizabeth Skelton? Mary Faber? How about the Black woman Azulu Curry, who tried to assassinate Martin Luther King during a time when he was building international alliances with revolutionary leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Kenneth Kaunda? Or a woman like Ava Rich, who opposed leaders like Malcolm X, who advocated for self-determination and Black liberation on an international level? They never existed? History shows us that good Black women such as Amy Jacques Garvey, Henrietta Vinton Davis, Queen Mother Moore, Betty Shabazz, Marimba Ani, Ama Manzama were all on the side of revolutionary men, and yet selfish ones stood against them. Now, when we look at the collapse of Black marriage rates, there are actually a few theories that analyze the history of Black families. You have the African-centered model advocated by scholars such as Wade Nobles and Ama Manzama. Those emphasize that Ma'afa and the impact of slavery and genocide on African peoples are a primary factor for the collapse. The Black feminist model, advocated by Michelle Wallace, Bell Hooks, etc., emphasizes the Black patriarchy theory and the idea that cis heterosexual Black men are middlemen oppressors standing between white people and marginalized subgroups in the Black community. The cultural deprivation model emphasizes the idea that Black culture is defective and the root of the majority of Black problems, while ignoring the impact of structural racism. The exchange model encourages Black families to partake in social formations that are based upon a precedent of social and institutional rewards. The assimilation model emphasizes the idea that assimilation into Western values is the best path forward for Black families. The historical materialist model essentially is now Marxist idea that the material conditions and resources govern the movement of Black families. And the internal colonialism model affirms that the Black community is an eternal colony of the American society. The study of Black families has taken on many theories over time, but when we consider the history of racism, the impact of industrialization, and more, we can see that the disruption of Black families resulted from many factors, including but not limited to misandrist terrorism specifically directed at Black men, the belief among Black feminists that job opportunities and higher education were a better opportunity than marriage to men, industrialization, and the difficulties rural Southern families had in adjusting to urban environments up north, and public policy that treated Black people as objects instead of humans. The Moynihan Report is one of many documents specifying that money was not the primary reason for the growing divorce rate in the Black community. In his report, he mentions the Aid to Dependent Children Program, ADC, later named the Assistance for Families with Dependent Children, AFDC. This was a social safety net program implemented in 1935 as a component of the Social Security Act. Though the program was initially for widows and orphans, many states implemented extra requirements, such as the man in the house rule and residential requirements that prevented Black women from taking advantage of the program. Jim Crow advocates who constructed these extra requirements said they were for moral reasons and called it morality clauses, but really the goal was to just maintain institutional racism. The worst part is that government bureaucrats were known to routinely visit the homes of AFDC welfare recipients to see whether or not men were there. This pressure made it increasingly difficult for poor Black families to survive. The man in the house rule was eventually abolished in 1968 by the Supreme Court due to its racist motives. So, how does this policy impact black families? Well, in the 30s, when the AFDC program was implemented, the divorce rate among black and white families was around 2%. The dependent children claims in the AFDC due to desertion went from less than a third in the 30s to 2/3 in the 60s. In the 60s, black male employment and income went up, while black male poverty went down. At the same time, however, black female welfare claims and single motherhood rose. Based upon these factors alone, it is not true that broke dusties are responsible for the destruction of black families. There were clearly other factors at play. The Monahan report specifies that the destruction of African family structure and the inherent attacks against black men through institutional racism basically created a natural separation between black men and black women. These factors also made the plantation-based matriarchy a default standard in the black community. In spite of this, numerous scholars, from Sterling Stuckey to Tommy Curry, have detailed how black men have always fought to maintain their African heritage and cultural institutions despite chattelization and genocide. Some of these were Free African Society, African Lodge, African Methodist Episcopal Church, Freedom's Journal, etc. And let's not forget the many rebellions and revolutions that black men fought and died in to abolish chattel slavery, such as the Young's Revolution in Mexico, the Haitian Revolution, Sam Sharp's Baptist Revolution, the Palenque Revolution in Cartagena, the Gullah Wars in the US. I mean, you get the picture. Black men have been progressive when it comes to the rights and empowerment of black women, and our history shows this. From Prince Hall, who helped Belinda Sutton draft the first successful reparations claim, to leaders like Marcus Garvey, who implemented a 50% gender quota in the management of the UNIA institution. This shows that black men have always been committed to protecting and providing for black women against all odds. Now, about divesting. Men of other races are not very likely to marry black women. About 0.22% of Asian men marry black women, less than 1% of white men marry black women, and less than 1% of Hispanic men marry black women nationwide. This isn't really surprising when we consider tense racial dynamics and, unfortunately, the bad reputation that precedes us black women. Here's the bigger picture. It's definitely true that there are many problems within the black community, but we'll never be able to move forward as long as we see each other as enemies, the source of the problem, and can never be self-reflective. If we hold onto lies, false narratives, half-truths, or start spewing propaganda against ourselves, we are participating in our own demise and our own unhappiness. Sure, there is work black men need to do, no doubt. But let's not overlook the ones who are building and doing the work. We should support, work with, and celebrate those who are at work, often behind closed doors and often unnoticed. Those men rarely get recognized because, quite frankly, it's more entertaining, validating, and sensational to complain about the dusties that we are secretly attracted to. Meanwhile, the good men who build, they get overlooked for the hot, sensational, and often promiscuous F-boys. But complaining about the small percentage of baby daddies or bashing men while avoiding self-accountability will not solve the problem in the long run. A more helpful solution, in my humble opinion, is first, encouraging women to be introspective and to look honestly at the different decisions they have made to lead to the situations in their life, whether good or bad, helpful or hurtful, hopeful or dreadful. We must first acknowledge the truth about ourselves. And sometimes that is not always pretty, but it's the first step towards healing and towards a more peaceful existence. Mental health issues, they're real. And many of us women find ourselves susceptible to these issues due to trauma and many different factors. But that's nothing to be ashamed of. This is an opportunity for us to face the different demons that fill our minds. And this is where strong and healthy spiritual communities can help. And I don't know, maybe consider a 12-step program. AA, Al-Anon, CODA, OA, or even therapy. Anything to get us started. The goal is to get us to address the reasons why we as women might constantly find ourselves in endless cycles of toxic relationships and situationships, if that is indeed your story. We must first be willing to acknowledge the truth about ourselves before we can ever think about pointing a finger at others. And once we have done that and made peace with God and ourselves, then we'll be better equipped to find righteous men who have a vision to build. So I ask you, are black men really the problem? Or is it something else? What do you think? Let me know. Leave your questions, comments, concerns below. I'm Shay Sharday, and I tackle tough topics with truth. Thank you so much for listening. If you've gotten this far, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, don't forget to hit the like button, and don't forget to share. Bye.